good day and thank you for joining CivilNet. Today my guest is Gevorg Dergabrielian, Eurasia Partnership Foundation Director. And this is a very exciting chance for me because recent developments in Armenia, to have this open-ended and comfortable dialogue with someone and hear of estimations or ideas of what's happening in Armenia. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Mr. Dergabrielian, I'm going to throw at you a couple of ideas, and I'd really like to hear what you think about those ideas. Recent changes in Armenia's government. A common idea is train of thought is that it's just remarketing the already existing governments. How do you see that?
Well, I think it's that as well as an attempt to do some good things, both together. For me, you know, I was just giving the example in an earlier interview. I am from the center of Yerevan, and I left Armenia in '93 and came back in 2007. Well, I was visiting, but I was away most of that time. And when I was leaving Armenia, I had several people in the government circles, among the decision makers, who belonged to the same flock I did. So, you know, Yerevan city, boys from the neighboring school and things like that. When I came back, I had nobody like that to relate to at the highest levels of the government. Maybe there were good people, maybe there were not so good people, but it was a different feeling of a, you know, of a generation of the flock, which is now at the age of making decisions, and they are not around. Most of them have left, and for many years, since 2007, I almost never had anybody to relate to that way.
That was a common thing. People were saying about the governments of the country generally, that everyone who's in power has the Soviet tactics, and it's the derivative of the Soviet school of government. So Armenia needed this rejuvenation.
I don't think Armenia needed it, and I think there is a lot of a chance in that. The fact that these kind of people came to power, you know, I usually make a comparison with the school, where in some class there may be one bully, and the atmosphere in that class will change. You can try to explain it with objective arguments why there is this bully there, but it happens, you know. So it happened with us that some bullies came to power, and not just bullies, people who were transmitting the what I call blatnoy, the Russian word for criminal, culture, inherited from the Soviet times. And if it changes even a little bit, if at least the faces of some of the government members do not create that impression that this is a person from a totally different background, from a value set that you cannot ever relate to, that's already a good thing. That's an advance for me. And that's not just cosmetic advance, because it's the values which are different, independently of their political views and independently of their management capacities, which I do not feel that may be very strong, and I'll tell you why. Because many people in the previous governments as well, they have studied also in the West. And then there is this surprise. Why did these people who studied in the West, learned all the good things, they come back and they do not promote these things? They continue on operating, as you said, in this post-Soviet style. So it's not just about studying in the West. It's also about some kind of a stamina to be able to resist the wave of the other values, this post-Soviet / criminal kind of, you know, system that is covering everything. And in many respects, it's coming via Russia, unfortunately, because in Russia, these changes also occurred over time. So this is what we're facing. A slightly better faces in the government, some decisiveness to maybe to do some changes, a lot of correct words included also in this government program. Let's see what happens, and we should all try to help them because there is no other way. We cannot just refrain from helping because we don't believe that they are going to fail.
Oh, well, so many questions. so many questions now. First of all, so we saw, is there such a thing as the rougher kind of oligarch is being replaced by the more moderate and, you know, oligarch? And another question is here is that are these changes in the government referring to the country as a democracy? Are they changes towards democracy, or are they changes towards better business model for Armenia? Are we promoting democracy with these changes, or we're promoting, you know, okay, we're going to get the GDP up, but we're not going to be more democratic?
Well, I'm going to say something pretty complicated, probably. I'll try to say it, not in such a complicated way. But when we use these words, democracy, I don't know, corruption, anti-corruption, human rights, etc., very often they become cliches. So it depends on what is the content of these words. And that's one of the unfortunate things, that the English language audience which is interested in Armenia, they very often operate with these cliches, and many things become unexplainable when it comes to the real realities in Armenia. Okay? So if we take these words for their real content, if it's a better business model, that will be also good for democracy. Why I would refrain from use of the word democracy too much? Because first of all, we see that at this stage it is, well, it is not even anti-democracy. It is not even such a quite a sad case as Russia, the authoritarian system in Russia these days. Okay, so this is somehow balancing. There are some elements which are about democracy. But the thing is that you cannot have a democracy if you do not have competing political party programs, competing ideologies, and that's what we don't have here. So it's either personalities who are political party leaders, or this big thing which I call rhizoma, like this, you know, postmodern term that I don't know, Michel Foucault or somebody invented, which is like this entire roots of everybody connected with everybody, because even if you have a soldier in the army, you have a difficulty going to utilizing your freedom of assembly, going to a rally, because you may be, your son may suffer in the army because of that. If you have a student in the school, you have a difficulty going to the rally because your son may get lower marks because of that.
There's always conflict of interest.
This is the entire system, which is, I call this rhizoma. So as long as we will have that, we will not have a proper democracy, because we need competing and at least comparably equal in their capacities discourses of different projects on where should Armenia go, and we don't have that.
So is this what you mean when you earlier on you said that we need to support the changes that are happening otherwise because there's no other solution?
Well, because of course, if somebody invents an ideology which is interesting for people and people adhere to that, that will be great. So creating a political party or a movement which will be real, which will have something to offer in terms of the program to the population, that's one project. But I'm speaking in English, so for me it's the English language audience, many of the diaspora Armenians. So I think people like me and like our audience, their role should be in participating in management and business improvement. Of course, not refraining from participating in democratic change, not at all. So the movement to have several thousands of diaspora Armenians as observers during the elections, it's all very good and very important. But as I said, even if the elections are absolutely fair, I do not think the system will change unless there is the alternative, which we don't see right now. So for me, fairness of the elections is very important, but I also believe in incremental change. I believe that good manager or a group of good managers can do changes in Armenia if there is less of a corruption, because good manager, that means they are not corrupt. They cannot be corrupt and a good manager. And of course, there are levels of corruption. I should confess that when I was less experienced, I have given bribes to the police officers because there was no way around that. But
I've bribed the people for my student visa here,
okay.
or else I was,
so,
yes.
But there are levels of that, and there is also, as I said, will and stamina. So these days, if the police stops me, I know how not to be put in a situation where you feel yourself criminal and condoning the existing system, okay? So, but I always believed that good managers can pretty easily, if they do the correct type of reform in the government, change the situation to 10–15% to the better in 1 or 2 or 3 years. And if that happens, if it's 10%, that will have the externalities which will be much larger. So the 10% in fact will become 15, 20, 25%. And I see there is a big room for such an improvement.
So our new Prime Minister, Karen Garabedian, granting the fact that he might be a very good manager and a very smart person, the 6-month period which is given to prove that his capacity, will that be enough?
I don't think so, but I'm not even sure that if it's 6 months or if it's what. I think it will be all decided in some different ways. But at least, again, as I said, we have some nice words, and there are some very important things that should be accomplished in these 6 months. For instance, the domestic violence law should be adopted before the end of this year. If it's adopted, it will be a milestone in building some of the elements in Armenia which make it a more robust society. And you know how controversial that issue has become. And it's very strange, because who in their straight mind can claim that they like beating up their women, their wives, and therefore they don't want such a law? It's amazing that there is this opposition to this law. And I think it's coming not because people really believe that it's wrong, but because they are mostly bribed by some other forces. I don't know, I don't have a reason to claim that it's pro-Russian forces, but in some cases we know that it's some people from Russia who are trying to implement such projects here, anti-democracy, anti-human rights movements and things like that. So this is one of the milestones. Then there is another milestone, the anti-discrimination law, which should be adopted. So there are some clear things that have to be accomplished. I hope it will be accomplished, and then if the government changes again, we'll see. I don't know. The more there is a pressure on this government, or on the nomenclatura in general, to continue on the path to reform, the better. So everybody, whoever is interested in Armenia, all of the diaspora Armenians, those who signed that letter, those who criticized that letter because there was no woman who signed that letter.
We're talking about the Global Armenians.
Yes. Let's
and
join.
Before that, there was the Justice Within Armenia initiative.
Yes.
There were a couple of things.
Yes.
So speaking of this, you brought up the word bully, and we spoke about trust in the government or in the changes. So what's at the basis of the lack of this trust? And also, given that there is a lack of trust towards the government within Armenia, and there's too much trust probably in the diaspora towards Armenia's government. And we here in Armenia, the government has been a bully to the people for so long. How can that trust come to a level where both the Armenian citizens in Armenia and the Armenians in the diaspora have equal level of trust and mistrust towards the Armenian government?
You know, it is a very complex issue because the lack of trust is a global problem. It's not just Armenia problem. And the other part of that paradox that you mentioned, the fact that many well-established diaspora people who help Armenia or who could help Armenia regard Armenia as indivisible entity represented by its government, which is not in fact trusted by its people. This paradox is well known. Partly it is explained rationally, because they say if I'm going to talk to a congressman in United States, he, which is usually he, will have only, is not going to get into the details. He just wants to know, Are they our friend or are they not our friend? So if I try to explain to him that, you know, there are these movements for democracy, but there is also this injustice and blah, 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 it's just the aid to Armenia may get lower. That has been the explanation for several years until today. But things are changing. Now the diaspora is much more aware of the big issues here. And they also see that change does not happen here the way it should happen here. So we should find ways, without diminishing the interest towards Armenia, also to be attuned to its internal problems. Even because this way, the diaspora establishment is losing trust with the Armenian people. So it's something to consider.
Dilemma,
what are
really.
you, yes. Who are you with, right? These are difficult questions, not easy to tackle. But I think a principled position is pretty much possible. And I think that the government, both because of they may become scared if there is a pressure, but also because some of them want real change, will be happy to a certain extent if there is this change of attitude, if there is more of a participation. It won't be a total negative attitude by the government. So yes, let's participate. That's one part of the answer. The other part, why there is lack of the trust here? Well, that's a long story. It's the Soviet story. You know, there are low trust societies and high trust societies, as Francis Fukuyama explained. Because I was surprised, for instance, when I went to the United States and I was adopted to a university as a graduate student with a good scholarship, with no personal interview, and not even with a photograph of mine, which was very unusual for me because in the Soviet times, first of all, it should be a personal interview. Secondly, you need your photograph to be put there on the application form, and here it was prohibited. So that was, of course, now things have changed slightly. America is also becoming low trust society after September 11 and all these things, but still not that much. You know, these credit cards were given again with no background, no justification, which was one of the reasons for the collapse of 2008. But that's high society. And here you traditionally have a very low trust society because since the Stalin's times, if we don't go even further down, you don't know if this guy is going to write to KGB on what they talk to you or not. And it was indoctrinated that you should write to KGB. So you don't know who are you dealing with, how many people suffered because this guy wrote about them. And this is, you know, kind of, it's like chemical, which is makes to dissipate the social fabric. So nobody can trust nobody in such a situation. And it wasn't taken care of well enough. So it came up in the post-Soviet times. And that's what we now see.
All right. Thank you very much. I hope to see you again here soon to continue this conversation as changes are happening in Armenia, hopefully positive. And we also change our viewers for joining us. Stay with CivilNet for more conversations, interviews, and news.